Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Today we are going to discuss the very private and personal information you leave with a gun store, either in their store or online, when you purchase a firearm or related good from them. How does a gun store or how should a gun store protect that information? And to what extent does the ATF, local law enforcement, or any other government agency have access to that information at their request? If that sounds interesting to you, we're going to discuss that now. First, jumping into this video, I want to clarify that I am not an attorney, so if you are an FFL or have purchased a firearm from an FFL and you have particular questions about your circumstance, I recommend you reach out to an attorney or to a local ATF field office. Now, moving forward into this video, there have been a lot of stories circulating basically in two regards over the past few weeks. One, there was the story about an IOI, an industry investigator, taking pictures on her personal cell phone of a dealer's A&D logbook. I'll explain what was going on there. Other stories have been revolving around the ATF going door to door and seizing property that has now been deemed to be illegal, such as solvent traps and force reset triggers. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to talk about how the ATF may come into possession of information that would give them names, addresses, and all the sorts of information about the firearms that have been purchased by you if you go to a gun store. Also, I'm going to talk about the information that is not required to be kept legally by a dealer, such as business transaction records or any other business-related or marketing or sales history records that any type of business, no matter the industry, would keep. Now, first of all, why would somebody want to obtain an FFL? An FFL is a federal firearms license. It is required to be obtained by an individual who intends to engage in the business of buying and selling firearms. Now, in this country, depending on your state, you can buy and sell firearms privately so long as it is considered a hobby. If you're going to make it your primary source of income, you have to acquire an FFL. Now, it is up to you whether or not you want to follow those laws. A lot of people say, screw those laws, I'm going to do what I want to. That's totally fine for you. But somebody like me, dealing in thousands and thousands of firearm transactions every year, I play it safe, I follow the law, I obtain an FFL. Now, with an FFL, you are required to keep certain transaction records, such as 4473s and an A&D logbook. Now, those records have to be made available by the ATF under a set of very specific circumstances, which I will go over with you. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to separate what would be considered federally required for a dealer to keep transaction records that contain your information and other records that a business might have that also contain your information that are not federally required by the ATF and may not necessarily be accessible by the ATF or local law enforcement agencies without a warrant. So, moving forward with the information that we are required to keep, the two basic forms of information we have to have on hand at all times is the A&D logbook, that's the acquisition and disposition logbook, and the Form 4473s. Now, the A&D logbook, acquisition and disposition, as the name would suggest, we are required to keep a running inventory of every single firearm that comes into our possession. We either keep a bound paper log or we are allowed to keep that information digitally. That bound book or that digital log has to have the date we acquired the firearm, the make, the model, the caliber, the serial number, the type, and from whom we got it. Either a private person or another dealer, for example. On the other side of that log, there is a disposition line for that same firearm. That will be when we sell the firearm or transfer it to another dealer. It is the date that that transfer occurred, to whom it occurred. If it's an FFL, we provide their FFL number. If it's a private person, we provide the 4473 transaction number, such as a serial number that we assign to each 4473 transaction record that occurs. Now, the 4473 transaction record is the typical background check that you're going to do when you go into a gun store to purchase a firearm. You provide all of your information on that form that's run against the FBI NICS Instant Criminal Background Check System. Upon getting an approval, we mark whether you're a proceed or a delayed or a denied, and we go through the sale accordingly based on that. We cannot transfer that firearm to a private person without either a proceed or an open status. Now, I've talked about all the different statuses ad nauseum in previous videos, so I won't dive into that here. But we do have to keep those transactions or those 4473s on record for a period of 20 years. Now, again, on site we have the book, which ties every firearm to every 4473, and we have every 4473. Now, that is a lot of your information that is kept on site at a gun dealer's location. There might be people who want access to that information, such as the ATF or local law enforcement, let's talk about the very specific ways the ATF does have legal access to that information. Number one, and most commonly, is a compliance inspection. So in a period of 12 months, a gun store is susceptible to a compliance inspection by the ATF. This inspection can only occur once every 12 months, but because of a shortage of ATF agents who are actually doing these inspections, typically these inspections occur every 3 to 5 years. More often if a dealer has gone through previous inspections and there have been a lot of violations found, less frequently if previous inspections have found a dealer to be very much in compliance with the rules and regulations. But in a 3 to 5 year period, an inspector, an IOI, will come onto the premises. They will ask to see the records. They will do a physical inventory of what is in stock. They will look through the A&D logbook and the 4473s tied to that logbook to make sure that the information has been recorded correctly, that 4473 transactions have been conducted on every person who has left with a firearm, to make sure that there are no disposition lines left open on firearms that can't physically be accounted for. For example, a Glock 19 is listed in the book as acquired on July 3rd of 2021, but was never disposed of, yet that gun is not in physical inventory, so cannot be accounted for. That is what the IOI is looking for. Depending on the size of the business, this inspection can take 1 to 2 weeks. There could be multiple investigators for a larger business with more records that could show up to make the process go a little bit quicker. But the point is that information does have to stay on site. Now, in a digital log, it can be quickly downloaded to a jump drive. An IOI might ask if you would be willing to hand that information over to them so they can take it and continue their audit off-site, therefore making the inspection more convenient for the dealer. It is up to the discretion of the dealer whether or not they want to do that. Lawfully, they are required to conduct all inspections on-site without taking that off-site. Now we get into the story of what happened with the IOI, the investigator who was taking personal photos of the logbook of a dealer who was being audited under an investigator, doing their compliance inspection, if you will. Now, it is my understanding through looking at those stories that that gun store did not give that IOI permission to take that information off-site. Furthermore, it was also explained that that phone was a personal phone not belonging to or controlled by the ATF. Of course, all the logbook information as well as the 4473s contain a bunch of very privileged and private information, not only about you, but also the firearms that you've purchased and where you live, which understandably is information that people would want to protect. The second way the ATF or even local law enforcement could have access to that information is due to an ongoing investigation. Either a dealer is being investigated or another person is being investigated, and through that the dealer has been tied up in some of the legalities involved in that investigation. A local law enforcement department or the ATF will have access to your records for the purposes of that investigation. The third reason is through a criminal trace, i.e. the firearm that you used to own or currently own was found at the scene of a crime. Now, what the ATF Trace Center will do is they say they pick up a Glock 19, they will contact Glock with that information found on the firearm, figure out what wholesaler it was sold to, they will call the wholesaler will send them to the gun shop, they will call the gun shop will send them to you, because the dealer is required to provide the information off of the 4473 background check that you had gone through when you purchased that firearm that is now sitting at the scene of a crime. We have to provide that information as part of a trace. If we refuse to provide that information, we lose our license. Also, in the case of a compliance inspection, if we refuse to allow access to our information to an IOI, we also lose our license. The fourth way the ATF or government would have access to that information is if the gun store is either forced out of business or goes out of business. What I mean by that is a gun store, they are tired of selling guns, or maybe their business didn't quite work and they have to shut down. They are required to send their A&D books and their 4473 records to the ATF so they can be kept there. Also, if a gun store's records, if a gun store is forced to be closed because of non-compliance, also they will be forced to send their information to the ATF. You'd say, why wouldn't a gun store refuse to show their records to an IOI? Well, that would be pointless because the IOI would just shut the gun store down, and then part of being shut down, you would be legally required to send that information to the ATF. The fifth and final way the government would have access to that information is through a multiple gun disposition. That is, if you buy 2 or more handguns within a 5 business day period, that's business day of the gun store you're at. If the gun store you're at is only open Tuesdays and Wednesdays, then it would be 5 business days, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Tuesday. It's not 5 days, it's not 5 federally recognized business days, it's 5 days that that particular store is operational. If you buy 2 or more handguns from that dealer in a 5 business day period, that gun store will fill out a multiple gun disposition form on you, which includes your personal information as well as the firearm information of the 2 or more handguns you purchased. That is sent to local law enforcement as well as the ATF. The reason they did this is to prevent so-called gun trafficking, where people are purchasing, 30, 40, 50 firearms and driving them down to Mexico or whatever, or so that is stated to be the reason. Other than those 5 very particular reasons, the ATF or local law enforcement requesting access to that information would need a very good reason, or it would need a warrant to obtain that information. Now let's shift over to personal business records. So we as a gun store, or really just if we take away the gun store component, we are just a business. Of course, we keep personal information about firearms transactions for the purpose of marketing or tracing or recording our sales, to look at year-over-year growth, to get an idea of what customers are spending what amount of money with us, to get an idea of our best client base, demographic information. We use that to better cater to marketing and growing our business, to shifting our product offerings to a segment of the market that is going to generate us more revenue. This is a very, very typical business practice in no matter what industry you are in. Now, this information is kept at the behest of the business owner or the operational team of that business. That information is not part of what is legally required to be kept by the ATF. And the ATF and any other government agency has no right to that information unless you want to physically hand it over to them. So if you are dealing with a business that's not selling firearms or selling some sort of accessory or gizmo or gadget that goes on a gun, the background check's not required, a dealer transfer is not required, or any of that information. They're just storing your name and address and credit card information as part of just general business data. That information will not necessarily be accessible, or that information does not have to be provided to the government or the ATF unless through a court order, a warrant, or any related reason where you would have to be forced to hand over that information. Well guys, that is all I have for you today in regards to the information that dealers are required to keep for the ATF. If you have any questions about this or need any more clarity, please let me know down below. I know a lot of that was pretty technical. If you enjoyed this video and want to see other information about how the industry operates and the requirements and the hoops we have to jump through, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Turn on that bell notification button so you know when I am posting new content. Anyway guys, I'm going to leave you off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.